This story is titled, My Family Stole the Business I Started, but Karma Hit Them Hard. Now they're asking for my help. Guys, before we start the video, I just saw something crazy. 82% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. If you're already here enjoying the content, why not hit that subscribe button? It's completely free, takes just a second, and it really helps the channel grow so I can keep bringing you more stories you love. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Alright, so here's how this all started. My family has always been about business. But let's be clear, they've never owned anything. They've spent their lives working under someone else, clocking in, and thinking they're living the dream because they got a decent paycheck and a pat on the back at the company Christmas party. My dad? Corporate lifer. My uncle? Same boat, just a fancier job title. And my brother? He wasn't anything special either, just another cog in the machine. Me, though? I wasn't about to waste my life like that. I wanted something more. So after slogging through some soul-sucking jobs to save up cash, I decided to start my own thing, a startup. I had a solid idea, but what I didn't have was enough money. That's when I turned to my family. I sat them down and pitched my business idea like I was on Shark Tank. I told them, if you guys help me get investors, I'll give you stakes in the company. Simple, right? They weren't exactly doing me a favor. They were getting a piece of the pie if it worked out. To my surprise, they actually came through. I mean, I didn't think they'd take me seriously at first. My dad's the kind of guy who thinks entrepreneurship is just a fancy way of saying unemployed. But they pulled some strings, called up a few people they knew, and boom, I had investors. Not just any investors either. These were the real deal. People with money and connections. I was floored. For once, I felt like my family actually believed in me. And they didn't just stop at finding investors. They started getting involved in the business itself, tossing around ideas, offering advice, and even helping with some of the grunt work. I thought it was great at the time. I was like, wow, my family actually has my back. I didn't see it for what it really was, the beginning of them worming their way into something they didn't build. Anyway, I busted my ass getting this company off the ground. Late nights, early mornings, skipped meals. It was a grind like nothing I'd ever experienced before. But it paid off. By the second year, my startup blew up. I'm talking real success, enough money to make my head spin. We were making deals left and right, and I finally felt like all my hard work was paying off. That's when my family started showing up more. At first, I didn't think much of it. My dad and uncle quit their jobs to work with me full time, and my brother did the same. I thought it was awesome. I mean, who wouldn't want their family involved in something so personal and important? My dad would show up to meetings, pretending he was the big boss, even though he didn't understand half the stuff we were discussing. My uncle started acting like he was some kind of business guru because he had a background in finance. And my brother? That dude didn't know shit about running a company, but he strutted around the office like he was Elon Musk or something. Looking back, there were so many red flags I should have seen, but I didn't. I was too caught up in the success to notice. I mean, how could I complain? My company was thriving, and my family was finally coming together. My brother and I, who used to fight like cats and dogs over the dumbest stuff, were actually getting along. We weren't arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash, or who mom loved more. We were working together. It felt like my business had healed all the old wounds between us. I was proud. Hell, I thought this was what success was supposed to feel like. But man, was I wrong. So damn wrong. I think back to all the little things I ignored, like how my family kept telling me to watch my back around my friends and employees. They'd say shit like, you never know who's just trying to use you. Or, be careful with your girlfriend. She might just be here for the money. At the time, I thought they were looking out for me. I mean, who wouldn't trust their own family? But now I realize they were planting seeds. They wanted me to think that the only people I could trust were them. And the worst part? I fell for it. At the time, I wasn't even that rich. Sure, I was doing well, but I wasn't rolling in cash like some billionaire. My friends and employees weren't out to screw me over. They were just doing their jobs and living their lives. But my family? They were slowly positioning themselves, making sure I leaned on them for everything. The first real crack in the facade came during the pandemic. Everything went remote, and we started doing meetings online. That's when the power plays started. Suddenly, my ideas weren't good enough anymore. The same ideas that built the company were now being shot down left and right. My dad and uncle would gang up on me during meetings, and my brother would sit there like a smug little asshole nodding along with whatever they said. They'd suggest their own half-baked ideas, acting like they were the saviors of the company. It was exhausting. I went from loving my job to dreading it. The company I built, the place that gave me a sense of purpose, was turning into a source of anxiety and stress. And the worst part? I didn't know how to stop it. My family wasn't just employees. They were part owners now. They had stakes in the company, and they weren't afraid to use that power against me. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking, it's just a rough patch. We'll get through it. But deep down, I think I knew things were starting to go downhill. My family wasn't here to help me. They were here to take over, and I was too blind to see it. Looking back, I can't believe how stupid I was. The signs were all there, glaringly obvious, but I ignored every single one of them because I was too wrapped up in the idea of having my family by my side. I thought, this is great. We're a team now. Yeah, a team of backstabbing assholes waiting for the perfect moment to screw me over. It started small, like most betrayals do. During our online meetings, they'd interrupt me mid-sentence to offer their perspective. My dad would say stuff like, I don't think that's the right direction for the company, as if he had a clue what the right direction even was. My uncle, Mr. Finance Genius, would constantly throw out buzzwords he barely understood. And my brother? That smug little shit would just sit there, nodding along like their hype man, occasionally chiming in with, yeah, I agree with Dad. At first, I thought they were just being overly enthusiastic. I mean, they were new to this level of business, so I figured they were trying to find their footing. But the interruptions turned into challenges, and the challenges turned into outright dismissals. The ideas I brought to the table, the same ideas that had gotten the company off the ground, were suddenly outdated or not innovative enough. It wasn't just during meetings either. My brother started taking credit for stuff he had no hand in. We landed a big client, one I had been working on for months, and somehow he spun it like he was the one who made it happen. I let it slide because I didn't want to rock the boat. It's just a small thing, I told myself. It's not worth the fight. But those small things started piling up. Then there were the constant family meetings. They'd corner me after work or during lunch breaks to talk about how we should be running the company. My dad had this habit of saying, you need to start thinking about the big picture, as if I hadn't been the one with the big picture to begin with. My uncle kept bringing up these ridiculous cost-cutting measures that would have gutted the team. And my brother? He just parroted whatever they said, pretending he was this brilliant strategist when he couldn't strategize his way out of a paper bag. One time during one of these so-called meetings, my dad told me, you're too close to this. You need to let other people take the reins. I laughed it off at the time, thinking he was just being dramatic. But now I realize it wasn't just a suggestion, it was a warning. They weren't here to help me run the company. They were here to take it from me. The breaking point, though, came during the pandemic. I think being stuck at home gave them too much time to scheme. We had to make some tough decisions. Cutting costs, shifting priorities, that sort of thing. It was stressful as hell, but I was doing my best to steer the ship. That's when the mutiny started. During one of our online meetings, I brought up a plan to pivot some of our operations to adapt to the lockdowns. It was a solid idea, something I had put a lot of thought into. But before I could even finish explaining, my dad cut me off. I don't think that's going to work, he said, like he was the CEO or something. My uncle jumped in, agreeing with him, and my brother, because of course, sided with them. They proposed their own plan, which was basically just rehashing what we were already doing, but with fancier words. I tried to push back, but they steamrolled me. They had the majority vote, so their shitty plan got approved, and mine got tossed aside. That meeting was the first time I felt like an outsider in my own company. I couldn't even recognize the business I had built. These people, my own family, were turning it into things got worse from there. My brother, who had no clue how to manage anything, started acting like he was running the show. He'd send out emails to the team, signing off as if he were the CEO, and even started making decisions without consulting me. When I confronted him about it, he brushed it off. I'm just taking initiative, he said, like I should be proud of him. My dad and uncle weren't any better. They started holding meetings without me, making decisions behind my back. When I found out, they acted like it was no big deal. We didn't want to bother you, my dad said, as if I wasn't the one who created this damn company in the first place. I tried to push back, but it was like talking to a brick wall. They had me outnumbered, and they knew it. Every time I brought up an issue, they'd gang up on me, making me feel like I was the problem. You're being too emotional, my uncle would say, like I wasn't allowed to care about the business I built from the ground up. And my brother? That little shit had the nerve to tell me, maybe you should take a step back and let us handle things for a while. The audacity of that guy still pisses me off when I think about it. By the time we hit the midpoint of the lockdowns, I was miserable. My anxiety was through the roof, and I was having panic attacks before meetings. The company I once loved felt like a prison, and my family were the wardens. I knew something had to give, but I wasn't ready to admit just how bad things had gotten. It wasn't until later that I realized what they were doing. They weren't just undermining me, they were setting the stage to push me out entirely. And like an idiot, I let them. The whole situation turned into something straight out of a bad drama series. Except it was my life. The writing was on the wall for a while, but I was too wrapped up in trying to fix things to see what was coming. It all started with a mid-year meeting. I came into the meeting prepared, thinking it would be a tough but straightforward discussion. I should have known better. Right out of the gate, my uncle, in all his smug glory, suggested that maybe I should be on the chopping block. At first, I thought it was a joke. I mean, who says that to the person who built the company from scratch? But nope, he was dead serious. He started talking about how my brother had stepped up during the pandemic and was now handling most of the responsibilities. According to him, it only made sense for my brother to officially take over my role. I was floored. My brother taking over my role? The same guy who thought profit margins were something you color-coded on a spreadsheet? The same guy who once confused gross revenue with net profit during a client presentation? You've got to be kidding me. Before I could even process what was happening, my dad chimed in. He had the audacity to suggest that I either step down voluntarily or accept a demotion, in my own company. He said it with this fake-ass tone like he was doing me a favor, like he was being the reasonable one in the room. We just think it's for the best, he said, as if I was some intern who had screwed up too many coffee orders. I looked around the virtual meeting, waiting for someone, anyone, to defend me. But no. My uncle nodded along like a bobblehead, and my brother, that little snake didn't even have the guts to make eye contact with the camera. He just stared at his desk, probably hoping I wouldn't call him out. I tried to argue, but they shut me down so fast it was like they'd rehearsed it. My dad started talking about how business is business, and how I needed to separate my emotions from the company's needs. My uncle backed him up, throwing in some bullshit about the greater good, and how my brother was the natural leader now. The whole thing was a setup, and I walked right into it. They voted me out, just like that. My own family voted me out of my company. I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to figure out how the hell I'd let it get to this point. These were the people I trusted most in the world, and they stabbed me in the back without so much as a second thought. The rest of the meeting was a blur. They moved on like nothing had happened, talking about next steps and assigning responsibilities. My responsibilities to my brother. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I logged off without saying a word. What could I say? Anything I wanted to scream at them would have just made me look even worse. After the meeting, I sat in my office for hours, staring at the wall. I couldn't believe it. My family, my own flesh and blood, had just kicked me out of the company I built with my blood, sweat, and tears. I felt like an idiot for ever trusting them. All those late nights, all the sacrifices, all the times I went above and beyond to make sure the company succeeded, it didn't mean shit to them. They saw an opportunity to take over, and they took it. I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to fight back, to lawyer up and sue their asses into oblivion. But the other part of me, the part that was tired, broken, and just plain done, wanted to walk away. The thought of going back to that toxic environment made my skin crawl. I knew I wouldn't survive another day in that hellhole. In the end, I chose to resign. Maybe it was the coward's way out, but I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it was tearing me apart inside. So I wrote up my resignation letter, sent it off, and that was that. I was officially out. Leaving the company was like ripping off a scab that hadn't fully healed. It stung like hell, but there was a strange sense of relief too. I was free from the backstabbing and manipulation, but I was also out on my own with nothing but my savings and a bruised ego. It wasn't exactly a movie moment where the hero walks off into the sunset with a triumphant grin. No, it was more like walking into a storm, clutching a broken umbrella, and hoping to make it out alive. The first few months after resigning were rough. I had to move out of my cushy apartment and into a much smaller place to cut costs. Selling my car was next, which felt like another punch to the gut. That car was one of the few luxuries I'd allowed myself after years of grinding. But it had to go. My pride wasn't going to pay the bills. Starting over wasn't just about finances, though. It was about finding a way to rebuild my confidence. I spent weeks spiraling, questioning everything. Was I even capable of building another business? Or was my family right? Was I just lucky the first time? I hated that their voices were still in my head, even after I'd cut them out of my life. Eventually, I got tired of feeling sorry for myself. One morning, I woke up, looked around my tiny apartment, and thought, this isn't it. This can't be where my story ends. That's when I decided to stop sulking and start working. I didn't know what the hell my next move was going to be, but I knew I had to make one. I started brainstorming ideas for a new business, something completely different from what I'd done before. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the old company or the people who ruined it for me. It had to be mine, something I could pour myself into without anyone else's fingerprints on it. The first few ideas were trash, half-baked concepts that wouldn't have made it past the planning phase. But eventually, I landed on something that felt right. I won't get into the specifics, but let's just say it was an industry I was passionate about and one I knew I could excel in. The problem? I didn't have the kind of cash I had when I started my first company. Back then, I had investors and family support. Now it was just me, my savings, and a few favors I could call in. It was terrifying, but at the same time, it was exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. No one else was pulling the strings. It was just me. Building the new business was a grind, even harder than the first time. I was working 12 to 14-hour days, juggling a million tasks at once. Some days, I didn't even know if I'd have enough money to make it to the next week. I lived off ramen and instant coffee, the kind of diet that screams broke entrepreneur. But I didn't care. Every small step forward felt like a victory. The loneliness was the hardest part. My family was gone, blocked on every platform I could think of. They didn't deserve access to my life anymore. I cut ties with anyone who even remotely reminded me of them, which meant my social circle got a lot smaller. The only person who stuck around was my wife. She was my rock, the one person who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. If it weren't for her, I don't think I would have made it through those first few months. About a year in, things finally started turning around. The new business began to take shape, and by some miracle, it started generating revenue. It wasn't much at first, just enough to keep the lights on, but it was a start, and that was all I needed. A small glimmer of hope to keep me going. By the second year, the business was thriving. It wasn't just doing well, it was doing better than my first company ever had. I finally felt like I was back on solid ground. And the best part? This time, I was surrounded by people I trusted. No family drama, no bullshit, just a tight-knit team of people who believed in the vision as much as I did. Cutting off my family was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made, but it was also the most freeing. I didn't just block their numbers, I erased them from my life completely. My dad, my uncle, my brother, they were dead to me. Not literally, obviously, but you get the point. These were people who had no problem screwing me over when it suited them, and I wasn't about to let them back in, just because things were finally going well for me. At first, I didn't even think about them. I was so focused on rebuilding my life that they didn't cross my mind. But every now and then, a memory would creep in, a moment from before things went to hell. I'd remember the good times, like when my brother and I used to play video games together, or when my dad gave me advice about life. Those memories made it harder to stay angry, but then I'd remind myself of what they did. They didn't just betray me. They betrayed everything we were supposed to stand for as a family. And that's not something you just forgive and forget. Then came the shocker. I found out my old company was tanking. A mutual friend who used to work there gave me the rundown. After I left, my family basically stopped giving a shit. My dad, my uncle, and my brother treated it like their personal ATM, draining money to buy luxury cars and other crap they didn't need. Meanwhile, they let the actual business fall apart. Employees started leaving in droves, clients jumped ship, and the company that I built from nothing was circling the drain. Hearing that pissed me off more than I thought it would. I'd worked my ass off to make that company a success, and they destroyed it in less than 2 years. Part of me wanted to gloat, to laugh at their failure, but another part of me just felt sad. Not for them, obviously. They deserved whatever was coming to them. But for the company, it didn't deserve to go down like that. By the time I heard about their mess, I was already too far gone emotionally to care. My focus was on my new business, my new life, and the people who actually gave a damn about me. As far as I was concerned, my family could sink with the ship they'd stolen from me. I was finally in a good place. My new business was thriving. My personal life felt stable, and I'd moved on. Or at least I thought I had. But of course, life has a way of dragging you back into the mess you thought you'd escaped. And, surprise, surprise, the mess came in the form of my brother. It all started when I was reviewing resumes for a senior position in my company. I'd worked my ass off to build a solid team, and now we were growing fast enough to start filling higher-level roles. I was scrolling through the shortlisted candidates when I saw his name, my brother. Seeing his name on that list was like getting sucker punched. My first reaction was to laugh. Like, what the hell was this guy doing applying for a job? Didn't he still have my old company to play pretend CEO with? But the more I thought about it, the more curious I got. Something didn't add up. There was no way he'd be applying for a job unless things had really gone to shit. I decided to schedule the interview, not because I wanted to hire him, but because I needed answers. The day of the interview, he walked into my office looking like a ghost of his former self. He'd aged at least 10 years in the span of 2. His suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and he had this defeated look on his face like life had beaten him into submission. For a second, just a second, I felt bad for him. But then I remembered everything he did to me, and any sympathy I had disappeared. He froze when he saw me sitting behind the desk. His jaw tightened, and I could see the panic in his eyes, but he tried to play it cool. "Michael," he said, forcing a smile. "I didn't know this was your company." "Small world," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Let's get started, shall we?" The interview was awkward, painfully so. He stumbled over basic questions and gave vague, half-assed answers about his experience. It was obvious he wasn't qualified for the job, not even close, but I let him dig his own grave. I stayed professional, taking notes and nodding along, even though my brain was screaming, "Are you serious right now?" By the time we wrapped up, I'd made up my mind. There was no way in hell I was hiring him. As he stood to leave, I hit him with the same line he'd thrown at me during that fateful meeting years ago. "I think your contributions would be better suited to a lower-level role. You might want to consider applying for something more appropriate." The look on his face was priceless. He went from shocked to pissed in about 2 seconds flat. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped. "This is unprofessional as hell. You're letting your personal feelings cloud your judgment." I leaned back in my chair, trying not to laugh. "You're free to leave if you don't like it," I said, echoing his own words from all those years ago. And just like that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I thought that was the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. Within hours, my phone started blowing up. Texts, calls, voicemails, all from my family. My dad accused me of sabotaging my brother's career out of spite. My uncle went on a rant about how I was disrespecting the family. Even my mom, who had been mostly silent throughout this whole ordeal, chimed in, begging me to be the bigger person and give my brother another chance. The cherry on top? My wife. She'd always been supportive of me, but even she started questioning my decision. "Maybe you should reconsider," she said one night. "He has a family to support. Kids, Michael. Think about the kids." I wanted to scream. Why was everyone acting like this was my problem? My brother had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. He didn't care about me when he was voting me out of my own company. So why the hell should I care about him now? But the guilt started creeping in, as much as I hated to admit it. I couldn't shake the image of him sitting in my office, looking like a broken man. Was I being petty? Was I letting my anger get the best of me? I didn't know anymore. A few days later, I got a call from a mutual friend who used to work at my old company. He filled in the blanks for me, and holy shit, it was worse than I thought. Apparently, after I left, my family treated the business like their personal piggy bank. They bought luxury cars, threw lavish parties, and basically acted like royalty. Meanwhile, the actual business was falling apart. Clients were leaving, employees were quitting, and the company was hemorrhaging money. By the time the pandemic ended, it was a complete disaster. "They thought the company would run itself," my friend said. "They didn't realize how much work you were actually doing." Hearing that felt like a twisted kind of validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. My family had been riding my coattails all along. Without me, they were nothing. But the validation didn't make the situation any less messy. Now I had a decision to make. Part of me wanted to swoop in and buy the company back. It was still salvageable, according to my friend, but only if it was under new management. And by new management, I mean anyone but my dad, uncle, or brother. I'd have to cut them out completely, which wouldn't be easy. They'd fight me every step of the way, but honestly, I was ready for it. The other part of me wanted to walk away. Let them burn. They made their bed, and now they could deal with the consequences. Why should I step in and save them from their own stupidity? In the end, I decided to meet with them. Not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I wanted closure. I needed to tell them, face to face, that they were out and I was taking back what was mine. No more games, no more manipulation. Just the cold, hard truth. When I walked into that meeting, they looked desperate. My dad tried to play it cool, but I could see the panic in his eyes. My uncle was fidgeting, and my brother wouldn't even look at me. They knew they were screwed. "I'll buy the company," I said, cutting straight to the point. "But under one condition. You're all out. No stakes, no positions, nothing. You walk away with the cash, and that's it. They argued, of course. My dad said it was unfair. My uncle claimed he deserved a role. And my brother, well, he just sat there sulking. But in the end, they caved. They needed the money more than they needed the pride. Walking out of that meeting felt damn good. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd won. I took back what was mine, and I did it on my terms. My family can keep their guilt trips and their sob stories. I'm done with them.